This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Isotope, Sonarworks, and API. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre in an API lunchbox, mixed carefully through Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
The most important thing I would tell myself is just ask all the questions. Ask the dumb questions. You don't know what you don't know until you start asking questions. If someone is showing you the studio and tells you to do something a certain way and you don't know why they're telling you to do it that way, you should ask. If you don't know how everything's connected or it's working together, ask.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope RX and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, EQ, and limiting on this podcast episode. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always someone in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Sampley.app makes it easy to add collaborators to a project so that the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music. Just upload a voice memo or song and start commenting. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Sampley.app or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jon Blass, a Grammy Award-winning mix engineer based here in Nashville, Tennessee. His work has received 9 Grammy nominations, 6 Dove Awards, a pair of Stellar Awards, and frequently lands atop the Billboard Gospel charts, including 13 #1 gospel albums. Jon's mix credits include India.Arie, Tweet, Marvin Sapp, Donnie McClurkin, Anthony Brown, Jason Nelson, Donald Lawrence, and many others. He currently sits on the Nashville chapter, producer and engineers wing committee of the Recording Academy. Jon is also a former executive committee member of the Audio Engineering Society in Nashville and is an alum of the Society of Leaders in Development, aka SOLID. Thanks very much to Anders at Atom Audio for making our introduction. Thank you, Anders. Please welcome Jon Blass to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jon, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am ready to rock, Lidge. Excited to chat with you today.
It's great to have you here on the show, man. I don't think I mentioned it in the intro, but one of the credits that really caught my attention was recording the Fisk Jubilee Singers also as well in your discography. Just really cool stuff, really cool gospel recordings. So it's great to meet you, man.
Great to meet you as well. Yeah, I don't think we've ever met, but I'm so close to you too, just 2 miles away.
Oh, really? Are you in East Nashville side?
No, I'm in South Nashville, just east of Berry Hill.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Berry Hill's great. Yeah. Let's cut my teeth there.
Yes.
Well, so give us a little bit of an introduction in your own words into who you are. Give us the brief backstory of how you got started out in music and have found yourself at a place where you're mixing all these incredible gospel records from your studio.
Sure. I grew up in Michigan, and I got started in music really at church. I took lessons and things as a kid, but my little church had a small console, and I thought it looked cool and wanted to do it when I was kind of middle school age. And very quickly, I kind of became like the only sound guy at the church. So if there's, a rehearsal or a service or a funeral or a wedding or anything, I was there. And I just liked playing with it. I liked trying to make it better. I liked learning. I liked playing with the knobs and just making it whatever I could. And so I kind of took that love of playing with the audio side of things to college, where I got an Associate of Music degree from Grand Rapids Community College, and then transferred to Lebanon Valley College in Pennsylvania, where I got a Bachelor of Music degree with an emphasis in recording technology. So I did the degree, 4-year school thing, and then during that, I did an internship here in Nashville with a mixing engineer named Jon Yash.
Oh yeah, Yash is great.
You know him?
Oh yeah, he's been on the show.
Oh, has he?
And I'll be asking you some questions about him too, because I saw that you guys are tight.
Yeah, we are. I actually, after doing an internship with him, I ended up working for him after school. Once I graduated, I moved to Nashville, honestly, because it was kind of if you're going to go do music, it felt like you either have to be in LA, New York, or Nashville. And I was like, well, I know one person in Nashville and 0 in New York or LA, so let's move to Nashville.
Nice.
And I moved to Nashville and I sold clothes at the mall and just tried to be in the room hanging out or interning or wherever with whoever I could. And a handful of months later, Yash's assistant was moving on to something else. And I stepped into that role and I sort of worked full time as his mix assistant for 5 years before branching out on my own and
who was that?
Building. Who was his assistant?
Yeah.
Grant Green. And Grant worked with him for years. They were a match made in heaven. So stepping into that role was some big shoes to fill. He was an excellent assistant.
Yeah.
And so since then, the past 7 years or so, I've been completely independent, mixing records from my own studio.
That's awesome, man. And so your studio is it sort of a home studio setup now? And do you have a name for it or anything you like to call it?
I don't have a name for it. I keep thinking I should name this place, and I don't. But no, yeah, it is a home studio. I have a setup kind of in a detached building on my property. So I get to commute across the yard to work every day and have the luxury of a home studio without being in the home, which is really nice when you have a spouse and a kid and all that kind of thing. It's nice to not be in the house all the time.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the videos that I put together in a YouTube playlist that Anders probably shot, I think, is shows a picture of you going back into your back studio there.
Yes.
Maybe you should call it the Blastworks.
The Blastworks. I love it. I love it.
Cool. Well, awesome, man. Well, so tell us a little bit about your studio, and then we'll kind of dive into some questions about how you like to work and stuff like that. What do you find yourself surrounded by, and are you in your studio right now?
I am in my studio right now, and I found myself surrounded by very little, to be honest. I have the Atom A7X speakers and the Sub 10 from them as well. That's sort of my main thing. And really, I have a fader controller and one little consumer set of speakers as well, an awful lot of panels and sound treatment, and that's about it.
Nice. So really, I mean, that sort of answers the question about mixing in the box. It sounds like you're probably really relying on the computer to do a lot of the mixing.
I am, yes. All of it, yes. And I have experimented with some hybrid things and some outboard gear and some analog summing, and I keep coming back to the box, to be honest. I think it's one of those things where I learned to mix in the box, and I think that workflow, it works. And there are people who really benefit from outboard gear, and my style of mixing, the way I learned to mix, the workflows I have, it didn't really add anything.
Right. Okay. And so do you feel like a lot of what you learned was initially from Yash, and then also from Grant later?
From Yash, yes. Grant, I learned a lot of assistant things from him as an intern, but when I took over as Yash's assistant, Grant was moving on to something else. So,
right. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but yes, when I was interning for Yash, he was still summing everything through a console. But by the time I was working for him, he was in the box as well. And so really that learning process, that growing process, that workflow and gain stage and all of that stuff, was developed for me in the box.
Yeah. So it's cool to hear you talk about things like gain stage. It's one of those things that I think, maybe I instinctively do, and people bring it up as a question, but I never really, analyzed it very much. What does that mean to you? Like, what is gain staging if you're mixing in the box? How would you describe it to somebody who's like, what's that?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where I'm like, man, there's an awful lot of people talking about this. What is it?
Right.
And honestly, it's just something you do if you learned how to do this, right? It's just you have to make sure that the inputs and outputs of all your gear are at least somewhere close to optimal, which just in the box just means, you don't have all of your waveforms maxed out and so that because your plugins are taking the input directly from your audio, right? So if your audio's right at the top, that's not going to hit your plugin at a good spot.
And so in other words, if the clip itself, clip itself is like maxed out where it's like full volume, full scale, then it's like too loud to operate right through the plugins.
Right. And so that's the input side, and the output side is your fader, right? And so making sure that both your inputs and your outputs of each channel are set up for whatever is next. And so the output of the channel would then be your 2 mix or whatever. So yeah, I mean, if you have all your stems come into your session and they're all maxed out and your faders are all at 0, take a look at your 2 mix. It's red, so it's a balance of just pulling that stuff back, both on inputs and outputs of channels, and sometimes within plugins to make sure that you're, maintaining the integrity of the audio.
Now, where's a good starting place to start pulling things back? Let's say you're about to do a mix and the levels are kind of all over the place. Where would be your first place to go make adjustments? Would it be the clip gain, or would you put a trim plugin on a track and start doing it there?
I'd be more likely to use clip gain. Depends a little bit on the session, because if you're clip gaining things, you are changing the input of plugins. So if I get a session come in and there's all kinds of plugins and compressors and whatever on the channels that I may want to keep what they did, I don't want to change that. So then
in other words, they're delivering you something that kind of sounds right already. You don't want to change the way it sounds by adjusting the input level.
Exactly. But most times I would say I get pretty raw things, and I'll kind of do a, if like say there is no session, I put it in a session, I generally just kind of grab that all button, hit everything to -7 on the faders, and then go through and clip gain the 7 pads that were all the way to the top of their waveform. Just clip gain them down, So it's kind of a balance of both. Yeah.
So you just said you'd bring the fader level. It wouldn't be at 0. It'd be at -7 is a good starting point.
I always start low. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Yeah. My faders are usually below 0, below unity gain. And then, sometimes they go above. Depends a little bit on the session, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see what else might be something to look out for in that clip or the gain staging world. Where might you look and either eyeball or earball identify some problems that your gain staging is not right? Anything that comes to mind?
I don't think so. I often use kind of stem tracks to make printing deliverables easier, and so I kind of generally try to make sure that those are all hitting below clipping as well, so that when I need to print drums only, even if they go into the 2 mix, okay, we have floating point 24-bit, 32-bit, whatever. Like it's not it's not going to be a noticeable sound quality, but I want that stem to print not clipped too. So I do watch for that in my sessions as well.
So that means that, and we can get into template stuff here a little bit, but that means if you've got all the drums as part of your mix, they're going to the 2-track or the 2-mix, which is your final stereo output of your mix. I guess unless you're getting into Atmos and things like that yet. And then, but you're also simultaneously, and how would you do that? Do you send the drums first to their own stereo aux track or audio track where you can use that to print somehow, and then from there to a stereo mix track? Or do you sort of simultaneously do it?
No, that's exactly right. The output of the drums would be the drum aux channel, stem aux, I guess you could call it. And the output of all the stem auxes are the 2-mix.
Okay, great. And then when you're just doing the bouncing in Pro Tools, you can bounce the 2-mix, but you could also bounce those aux buses, drums, bass, like that. And they're going to just create these separate stem tracks.
Yep. Up to 16 at a time, I think, with Pro Tools Ultimate.
Right on.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and had you ever explored making those aux tracks audio tracks instead of aux tracks? Did you ever find yourself getting caught up in which one is better scenario, or is that are we just wasting our time worrying about stuff like that?
I have never done it with audio tracks. I guess the benefit there is you could just throw everything to record and print them all at one time.
Right.
Since I typically bounce instead of record real time. I haven't seen a need for that or tried that, but that could definitely be a benefit, especially if you're running hardware or need to print things in real time.
Yeah, well, one place where I've enjoyed having a print track, Craig Alvin was on the show and he sort of talked about his mix setup at one point. And I went down that path of saying, okay, I'm going to try and print my mix. One nice thing about printing a mix on a 2-track is that if that track's in record and you hit the Apple K, to kind of go in and out of input, you're getting you can get a kind of an instant comparison, an A/B reference between the last mix you printed and where you're at now, which can sometimes be cool. But you can also just do that with, reference plugins and stuff like that and other referencing routing.
Absolutely. What I typically do, like when making changes to mixes and things like that, is I have the latest print always in the session and just out a different output. So I can constantly switch between 1 and 2 just on my monitor controller quickly and easily to know did I actually make that difference that they wanted or not?
Yeah, because it's so easy to fool ourselves when we're making adjustments. We can get much further away. It's kind of like wandering in the woods without a compass. You don't realize how far away you went before you're lost.
Yeah, you kind of get hyper focused on something, and they wanted this up, and then you turn it up, and then you reference your the previous mix, and you're like, oh, we're really losing the vocals now. So let's figure out how to make that work or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You've already invested in your speakers, headphones, and the sound treatment of your studio. So you're ready to make great music, but your mixes don't seem to translate to the rest of the world when they leave the studio. The problem is that the frequency response of your room is not allowing your speakers to tell you the whole story. SonarWorks Sound ID Reference can solve this for you by calibrating your speakers and headphones EQ and balance so that you can now make better mix choices. Start with a 21-day free trial at sonarworks.com. The API Select T25 is a classic 2-channel FET feedback-style compressor limiter with a Class A tube output stage and custom API transformer, allowing split mono or stereo mode. Built with dual triode vacuum tubes, sidechain de-essing, detent controls for accurate recall, and API's famous thrust mode, the T25 represents a new design in tube compression. Bring the legendary sound of API to your home studio with the new Select T25 at apiaudio.com. When you print a mix plus a bunch of stems, so you're using the bounce dialogue, do you have a way of organizing that? Do you sort of make a folder for that particular mix that you're printing and inside the bounces folder or anything like that? Or do you just find that they all end up with a similar name and it's easy to keep track of what's what?
Well, the stems I never print until the mix is finalized. So those tracks are literally just hanging out there until the mix is finalized. And then I'll do the bigger prints with all the versions and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But yes, naming is extremely important to me, and I have a very consistent naming structure so that I know exactly what everything is. And yes, I print mixes to the bounced. What do they call it? Bounced files folder, and leave them in there until they're finalized.
Do you want to give us a little bit of a peek at what your naming structure would be?
Yeah, actually, it's readily available from the Recording Academy's website. They have the P&E wing has a guidelines sheet, kind of a best practices, and it's life-saving for naming structures, for folder hierarchies, for how do you define what a stem is, like all that kind of thing is all in those guidelines. And I think that's hugely valuable. So I use that structure. But it's always a 2 or 4 letter artist indicator, underscore song title, underscore mixer initials, underscore version, and then underscore bit depth sample rate.
Wow.
Yeah. So every time it's always by artist. It always has which number it is. So if this is the third mix, the second revision, it would be JBO3, Jon Blass 3. And that way there's no, I always hate that. Final mix 2.
Right.
This is really the final mix. So it's just a sequence of numbers. The highest number is the winner,
Yeah. Okay. So, gosh, maybe I should have you repeat that one more time as sort of like, describing what's in that name. So for example, if the session that you're mixing from, is it just called like mix 3, or is it does it have the same name as all this long bounce file name that you would create?
No, the session file will typically just say song title mix 2 or song title JBO2 or something like that.
Right.
So for instance, I'm looking at a session right now. The latest mix is mix 2. The song is called Stronger. So the Pro Tools file is just Stronger JBO2. And inside the bounced files folder, there's a file called EM underscore Stronger underscore JBO2 underscore master underscore 48K24.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, artist initials, song title, mix version, like mix number, then the version, master meaning all the parts are in, and then sample rate.
Oh, okay. So master means that there's no missing stem. It's not like not like the vocals are muted or something.
Right. Master as opposed to instrumental or or lead vocal up or something like that.
Not meaning that it has been mastered.
Right. Which is sometimes a point of confusion for people.
Yeah, totally.
But other than that, it's a great system.
Now, does that, I can't quite picture it, but does that mean that they sort of line up nicely in a folder on the computer screen as well? The different versions?
They will, yeah. Especially, at least as long as the songs are all the same. Like if it's one song in there, they will, go sequentially by number for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. And so that's on the PNE AES engineering website.
Recording Academy.
Oh, Recording Academy, sorry.
Yep, which the PNE wing. Yep.
So PNE. I'm Googling it right now. See if we can drop that link in for you, rock stars. PNE wing, Grammy.com. And then, is it hard to find this kind of stuff? Where would we even look?
I will send you a link for sure.
Okay, great.
But I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head. But
yeah, sorry. I feel like it's a fair question because even when I go to it now, there's like a whole bunch of menu items, and I'm like, oh goodness, where is it? But we'll try and put a link in to the show notes, Rockstars. So thank you for hooking us up there, Jon. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So let's see. You are mixing with a really simple setup, which is cool to hear. Tell us about how do you like using the atoms? Like, what are some things that you dig about that? Now, those monitors have the accelerated ribbon tweeter design.
They do.
How do you find that that's either a challenge or a benefit for your mixing?
To me, I love them. I think the high end on these atoms sound fantastic. And they're monitors I've been using for, I don't know, 15 years, something like that. Like I know these speakers so well that, yeah, I know what a record's supposed to sound like on them. I know what they feel like. And that's maybe the most important thing with monitors. It's your reference point, right? So you have to know them really well. I think they have a tremendously good, smooth high end. And I love that. So there's in gospel music, especially, there's a lot of that kind of range that you have to deal with. And it's important to hear what's going on and know it really well.
Yeah. It seems like there's a real appreciation of kind of presence and air in a mix. These aren't, you're not going for dark mixes necessarily.
No, almost never really. Gospel music, it ranges a lot in terms of style. But there's almost always a big prevalence on background vocals or choir, which takes up a lot of space, and that many vocals takes up a lot of high end. And then there's also lead vocals, and usually big, bright, punchy drums and strings and horns and, you name it, it's all going on. So, so the atoms really help me know how to handle a record like that.
Plus, doesn't the ribbon tweeter kind of make it a little gentler on your ears while you're working?
I think it does. It feels gentle to me. You obviously still have to be careful about ear fatigue when listening loud and when listening a lot. And that can get taxing on your ears with any speaker if you're listening too loud or for too long. But yeah, they do feel they don't hurt. they're gentle.
And you're younger, right? You look younger in your photos, younger than me anyway. Although you got your family guy. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, do you feel like you are discovering your sort of volume and how much volume and energy you can do with music in the studio more and more these days? Or, how do you strike the right balance for volume and long days of mixing?
That's always a balance, I think, because it's fun to mix loud. And I think most of the time, if I'm listening too loud, it's because it's, I don't know, an emotional thing. Either I'm having fun and I'm excited and don't want to turn it down, or I'm nervous about my mix and therefore it feels better louder. And then it just takes discipline. Like, turn the things down, see what this mix really sounds like, get off the hype thing, and listen at reasonable levels. So other than just discipline about listening at good levels, for me, it's constantly kind of zooming in and out. I'll put it over on my little consumer grade speakers, and just listen while I go get a cup of coffee or whatever, sit back and get lost on Instagram for a few minutes while the song plays and just see what catches me, and then come back and listen loud again or listen quieter, just with a different perspective.
Yeah. Do you feel like if you're listening loud and you want to go quiet, that you can turn it right down in that moment and then keep working? Or do you feel like it's usually good to get up and, walk over to the coffee machine and then come back and start listening again at the low volume? Like, do we need a little bit of a buffer on our ears to do that?
The reset helps me for sure. Like, take a little time, because otherwise if you just turn it down, you're like, it's a letdown almost.
Right. Like, what happened?
Yeah. Whereas if you're silent for a minute or on a different pair of speakers or something, it can help you recalibrate. And 9 times out of 10, if you just flip it back to your mains, you're like, oh, wow, that was loud. What was I doing?
Yeah.
So a little bit of recalibration for your ears and brain is healthy, I think.
So I feel like that was always a thing in the car. Like
Oh yeah.
You've been driving and listening to stuff, and you pull over in the gas station, and then you get back in and you turn your car on, and you're like, oh my good Lord, that was so loud. What was I thinking?
Yep, absolutely. Especially if you're driving on a highway and had it turned up because there's so much road noise, and then you got off the highway and you're driving slower. Yeah.
With the windows wide open in the summer.
Yep.
Oh man, the things we do to ourselves in our youthful years.
Oh no. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then you've got the subwoofer going with that as well. How do you what tip do you have for sort of setting that up to where you're like, this is the way to do it? Is that something that you ever revisit, or did you set it and just forget it? And did you have a process for kind of deciding that it's the way you want it?
Yes and no. I mostly set it and forget it. It's not something I want to think about. The subwoofer is not, for me, it's not a toy. It's not like, ooh, I want to feel something more, or the monitors I want to be as consistent and normal as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when these were set, I had someone come in with a microphone, and we listened and moved things and measured things and set them up, and made them the best we possibly could. And then I don't touch it and don't think about it and try to ignore them for sure.
How big is your control room? Do you know, and do you feel like there is a appropriate balance between, a setup like a pair of these A7Xs and so the sub 10 is a 10-inch subwoofer speaker? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, in other words, if the room was much smaller or much bigger, would that affect the speaker choice, you think?
Potentially. I think it's 15 roughly deep and 12 roughly wide, with 8-foot ceilings.
That's very similar to mine.
Is it? Yeah, it's not huge, but it's comfortable. And, of course, the bigger the control room, the more you can have control over low end, and the more you can optimize your placements of things and things like that. But these speakers work really well in here. I think I could potentially go up a size, but I don't think I really need to. I don't think I would go with a smaller sub. But yeah, I think with a bigger room, sometimes you need bigger speakers to fill the space. And
then I guess depending on what sort of recording you're doing, it can be different too. So sometimes when you've got to be able to crank things up for the musician,
right?
That could be a different experience than what you can feel great about when you're mixing, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And 9 times out of 10, I'm in here by myself. I know what these speakers sound like. I know my room. I know all that stuff. And the client is listening on their system, where they know their system, and they can turn it up as loud as they're used to or want to. And they can play it in their own car, and they can play it on their own phones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter brings fast, clean, quiet compression and limiting to your recordings and mixes. The C610 includes the famous Spectra 101 amplifier used in legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, and Record Plant. I love using my C610s for drums, vocals, guitars, and especially bass, which now sounds bigger than anything I've ever recorded before. Make your mixes rock at spectra1964.com. In my studio, I've got the Mac Mini M1 paired up with the OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution to connect to all my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Okay, cool. Then tell us just a little bit about making a decision when you're mixing to know that you've got the right amount of low end. Is that still something that you feel like in the mix position you can really nail it, or do you have to sort of check your low end in a couple of different situations?
For the most part, I judge from here. Absolutely. There are times when I don't know. I'm struggling with it. It feels weird, something like that, and I'll check it somewhere else. But usually between my Atoms and my consumer grade speaker, I know what I'm hearing, and I leave it at that. Yep.
What sort of a consumer grade speaker do you? I mean, you can talk about what you've got if you want, or you can just talk about what you recommend. Maybe we don't need to overthink it. Maybe it's just sort of like anything that we get used to.
Absolutely. I think don't overthink it is the biggest thing. What I have is a little pair of, I think they're Panasonic. I mean, probably from the 90s. It's just like a little shelf system, like,
like
your
full jam box thing.
Yeah, exactly. 2 speakers and like that little center box where you put your CDs.
Does it have the flashy dancing lights in the middle that tried to, make sure you bought their box from the shelf?
This one doesn't, but
party mode.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not quite as cool as the one I had as a kid, but I'm used to it and I like it. I don't know. Some kid pushed all the like little cones in on the speakers, so it's probably not even accurate. It just,
wow.
But I know it and it works well. And when I flip it over there, I know what I'm listening for and I know what I'm missing. And that's really it. But man, if you got a little Bluetooth thing that you use at your house all the time, plug that at the studio and use it. Like it's what do you know and what are people listening on and how are you gonna translate that? So
yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to make a pitch for Amazon or anything, but I think I remember somebody mentioning that like whatever the Alexa Amazon speaker was one of the most common speakers for people listening. And it's encouraging to just at least hear you say, don't sweat the details, like get a Bluetooth thing and stream it over there and just, see if it sounds like a record to you on that thing, because if that's where people are going to listen to it, then that's where it matters.
Right. If you have, millions of people buying that low level Amazon Echo or whatever it is, buy that. If you can make it all work with your studio, and a lot of these things are difficult because they're wireless. But use that.
But you can, I guess if you are able to route your mix to the system audio of if you're on a Mac, for example, a lot of times that will have a Bluetooth connection. You can just connect it to the speaker and there you go.
Yes. Yep.
It's sending music over there. I had some kind of, I don't even remember what it was called. I've got it upstairs. It's like a rechargeable battery pack Bluetooth speaker, Bones with a Z or something.
Yep.
And I feel like it always had this like remarkable low end. And then one day I was like, is this really low end or is it just like vibrating a magnet inside there to sort of shake it a lot?
Yes.
I mean, I guess that's what a speaker is, right? So maybe it's the same thing.
Right. I had a very similar one years ago that I had sitting on my desk. And like, if I had a lot of low end, the thing would like walk across the desk.
Yeah, exactly. That's what mine's always like, walking off the shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where all the dents came from.
Yes.
Okay. So there's another thing I really want to talk to you about. It looked like you had the Avid S3 or something like that, maybe set up for your fader controller. Tell us about that. I actually personally am just sort of getting comfortable with the S1. I looked at the S3. What are some thoughts you want to share about what makes something like that great for you? What did you discover when you switched over to that, where you were like, oh, I thought it was going to do this, and it turns out I didn't use it for that at all? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I switched to the S3 from a single fader kind of thing. I honestly, there's a lot of automation in my mixing, and so faders are very important. And I thought it would be really beneficial to have more than one. I can do more than one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And I do that. I don't think that's quite as helpful as I expected it to. I definitely still like having more than one. I don't need 16. I only have 10 fingers here, but I do like to have the flexibility to solo something else while I'm writing a channel. So if I have if I'm working on a guitar on the far left fader, and I need to hear, the 7th guitar or the pad thing that's going, then it happens to be down in the 13th fader, I can solo it or mute it or whatever and not interrupt myself.
You could be in the middle of a ride on the guitar fader, still writing a move, but quickly check that something else was on a certain track.
Exactly. Yeah. Or working on strings and I'm writing a sub bus of the strings, but I need to say, wait, what is the cello doing there? Am I getting that? I can solo the cello.
Right.
Something like that is tremendously useful for me. I didn't expect this, but I really enjoy being able to bypass a certain number of inserts at a time, whether that's to A, B something, or I want to like turn off these three and then turn them back on and see if it's really doing what I want to. That's easy to do on the controller here. If I want to bypass inserts A, B, and D, I can, and leave C open, and then put them back in. And that's really nice to be able to do as well.
And so that's a little bit easier on a controller than it would be with a mouse on the screen, because with the mouse, you'd have to click 1, 2, 3 to turn 3 of them off.
Exactly. I can do all three simultaneously on a controller.
That's
so
fancy. Fancy. Yeah. What about let me see here. So you said you've got 16 faders in front of you while you're working. And then how do you navigate when you're so your sessions must be big. I mean, with gospel stuff, you must have a ton of tracks. So let's say you quickly need to go to the drums. How would you, like, what would you reach for? How would you get to the drums so that you're immediately adjusting the kick level or the snare level?
Yeah, most of that would be done without the controller and just with a mouse. And so two things on that note. One is that my sessions are always in the same order. So I always know where my drums are. If I'm with the synths, I know my drums are at the top. And so I can get there quickly just by scrolling. They're all color coded. So you can scroll really fast and stop at blue and know you're at the drums. Also, I like to use that little sidebar on the left side of Pro Tools where you see all your tracks. If you, I think it's Control-Shift-Click any track, like you'll scroll it up there. So
good tip.
I can be on track 200 and just Control-Click and I'm at 1, just like that. So without all
right. So you're not enabling or disabling or hiding the track. You're just simply making the focus jump to that track over in the little track sidebar. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. All the tracks that are active are visible in my sessions. I don't hide things unless they're inactive.
So then what about things like adjusting EQs and compression and things like that? Do you find that all takes place with the mouse, or have you found a controller to be useful for that?
All with the mouse. Yeah, that's one of those, I probably vastly underutilize this thing. I know you can do a lot of things with these. And honestly, it's so fast to open up a plugin with a keyboard that's just that's how I do it. So
yeah, I mean, I'll push back and I'll say, I honestly think you're probably not underutilizing. I think that the things that we instinctively start doing are a lot of the right answer for what, how it should be used. In other words, if it's easy enough to use it, if it was an EQ on a console, you'd reach for the EQ on the console.
Right.
But if the easier way is to grab it with the mouse, then that's probably the right way to do it.
Right. Yeah. And with Pro Tools these days, you can just like click and type the name of the plugin you want and it just pops up. Yeah. It's so fast that like to do anything else is just, why would you, I guess? Yeah.
So what are some typical EQ plugins that you might mix with? Do you ever use the SSL kind of stuff, or are you more like a graphical Fab Filter kind of guy?
Yes and yes. Both, I guess.
Right.
I think probably the Pro Q3 by Fab Filter is my most used EQ. That's my utility EQ. That's the one that is on almost every channel. But with gear, even if I could achieve it with something else, if I know that like I like it when I push this button on this thing, that's what this does, then you sort of end up using that. So
yeah,
I still like a 550A on my piano. Okay, so it sort of just defaults onto that on my onto my piano track. Could I do that with a Fab Filter plugin? Yeah, I could, sure. I just don't, because I know what that button does. So yeah, and same with drums. I typically end up with some SSL channel stuff on there. So yeah, could I get there with graphical EQs and a different compressor? Yeah, probably. But like that's the sound I'm looking for. That's the thing I'm looking for. That's the buttons that I know what they do.
Right. So if you're using something like the SSL, Do you ever get frustrated trying to use a mouse to make adjustments to those, as opposed to having, the frequency knob and the boost and the Q knob all right there when you're
I
adjusting
don't
it?
really, but I also never mixed consistently on an SSL, right? Like I've
Right.
used them, but I didn't grow up in that world where I was like, I'm used to mixing with the channel strip in front of me. I'm used to saying, oh, I got to push this button and then this button on the mouse, and then I have that thing,
Yeah.
So that's pretty normal for me. And you're pretty quick at it these days to just zoom around a channel strip and set the compressor where you want it and the EQ where you want it and move on.
Right on. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini, and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries at my studio, and it works great. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. 50 years ago, William G. Dilley introduced the world to his revolutionary new dynamics processor, the Model 610 Comp Limiter. A truly unique device, the Model 610 was not only the fastest, cleanest, and quietest of its type, but was also capable of providing completely separate peak limiting and compression functions. Today, Spectra 1964 introduces the Model C610 Comp Limiter, described as the most versatile piece of audio gear you can buy. Great for adding control and power to everything from vocals, guitars, and bass to mixing and even mastering, the C610 gives you the same massive sound that rocked legendary studios like Stax, Arden, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant. I'm using the C610 on every record I make at the Toy Box Studio, and you should too. You'll love it. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Jon Blass, joining us from Blastworks. Oops, I just named your studio. Here in Nashville, where he's mixing killer gospel songs and pop songs and all kinds of stuff. So, Jon, are you ready to jam?
Let's jam.
All right. So I thought I'd keep pushing you on the EQ question for just a moment. I'm picturing you mixing many vocals in a gospel session, and I'm thinking about you setting EQ with the mouse. And I want to ask you, like, what is a process for you to go through? Would it make sense? I mean, I know we live in a world where people are like, don't mix in solo, or whatever. We hear that every day. Yet at the same time, there must be a process where you go through the vocal tracks and just kind of pre-EQ things a little bit and make sure things are right before you start balancing them in a mix. Or am I thinking about it wrong?
No, that's absolutely right. To me, don't mix in solo is a broad thing. I use solo all the time. But what you're doing in solo has to be in context. So you have to know what you're doing and how that's going to impact the rest of the tracks. That's why you don't want to work in solo, is because you can make something sound great on its own, but it doesn't work in the track. But if I know what I'm going for in the track, soloing it to get an idea of what's going on is sometimes really helpful. But in terms of EQing vocals, I kind of look at it in a few different stages. Depending on how the vocals come in, I always group them by part.
I think they come in hundreds, groups of hundreds. Yeah. That's what I think.
True. True. Sometimes I'll get stems by part, or sometimes I get a blend, which is great. Oftentimes I get somewhere between 16 and 160 tracks of vocals.
Good Lord, man.
And It's a ton. And I'll go basically separate them by part, so that I can subgroup everything. Usually every channel gets a little EQ and compression. Oftentimes that's just a high pass, before it goes into a little compressor or something, just trying to even them out. Um, and then I'll sort of think of them more as a group, and I'll kind of EQ the group, and more EQ choices go into that. Like, is it too harsh? Is it
Right.
too boomy and muddy? Like that kind of stuff often happens a lot at that group.
What about
That group
compression?
level.
Would that be the place where you might think, oh, I want this to be a little bit, I'm going to compress it a little more to bring it forward or something?
It depends on how dynamic the recording is. If it's pretty raw, I'll do more compression at that stage. But a lot of times that subgroup stage is just EQ, and then more of the compressor will happen with the entire group. Again, that it depends. That's, if you're thinking choir or like kind of traditional background vocals for gospel where they're kind of all working together, that's true. If it's more of a pop thing where they all are doing different things at different times, and then more things would happen at a subgroup level.
Right. Okay. So if it's a real studio one overdub at a time situation, you're probably addressing each individual vocal
Yeah.
with its own compression EQ to get it right.
Yeah. I sort of think of the choir, in traditional gospel sense, as like a drum kit, right? Like it's one instrument. It just has a bunch of different parts to it. So you kind of want to treat it as one instrument, but you also have to control the parts.
Yeah, well, so one of the examples, of course, the Fisk Jubilee Singers, we've got that in the show notes. You can click through and listen to that in his Spotify playlist, Rockstars. But great stuff, and really a great combination of, being able to hear this huge gospel choir in a big space. Some of the songs have, powerful band going along with it. Some of them are really leaning on the vocals, but I can hear how there is a way, and we want to ask this, so I don't want to propose too much of what I think is going on, but you can hear that it sounds like you're capturing the whole choir, but you're also capturing sections that give you a little bit of control in the mix, where you can kind of have the sopranos over to the left, and then the bass or the altos over to the, sorry, I said that wrong. Sopranos were on the right in the one I was listening to, and then the next vocals coming over on the left. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, like, what are some typical ways? And I had a couple of questions from my interns in the studio too. Quincy was asking, how should you record a big gospel choir? Is there sort of some typical ways of setting that up?
Sure. And that ranges wildly. The Fisk Singers are, like, that album is kind of a raw album. Like, it's very live, very little production and fixing and that kind of thing to it. I think they did beef up the singers on most songs, certainly not all. But for the most part, that is really live. Most of the time with gospel recordings, a live record, which is really common, has a lot of overdubs on it.
Right.
And especially the choir is always overdubbed. And that is typically I would say I get kind of passes of sopranos, passes of altos, and passes of tenors.
So that makes them a little more isolated for you anyway.
Yeah. And sometimes they're all in the room together, and there's just like the microphones are on each section. They have 3 or 4 singers around each mic, something like that. And sometimes they just put the sopranos in the room. And sometimes they do both. And so you have more of a group thing and more isolated things. But yeah, and sometimes it's a big choir where they get a lot of people in the studio at once. It really depends on what sound you're going for. So it can really vary.
Yeah, well, so one of the videos in the YouTube playlist as well is you talking about your mix template and mixing process. And I think one of the things you mentioned was the importance of starting with a rough mix too, so you have a sense of, how is everybody thinking of this music that's coming to me with these different kind of recording techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. The rough mix, to me, the better the rough mix, the better the final mix, because I kind of know, I know where you're going, which if you know where you're going, there's less trying to figure out where you're going.
Right.
So that's good. And also the better the rough mix, the more problems are going to be addressed in production. So if the producer is getting a mix that sounds pretty good, it's because they've solved a lot of problems already.
Yeah.
Whereas if the rough mix comes in and it's just like a mess, well, then you open it up and you're like, yeah, it's a mess because this conflicts with this and this conflicts with this. And you got two different people playing a lick at the same time. And like everything's all over the place. And they didn't notice that this was mono and it should have been stereo and like all that kind of stuff. So
but it sounds like you had one hell of a party, guys.
Right. Exactly. So the more that the producer can get the sound they want, you're really setting up for a great mix.
Yeah, right on. Okay. Anything else that, stuff, I guess that answers part of this question, but the other part of Quincy's question was like, what do you need for the mix? What are the things where you're like, if you wanted to do, I don't know, I guess if you're just going to record a gospel, traditional gospel choir with band, what are some elements that would typically you'd want to make sure you had a mic on that and had captured this in a certain way?
Yeah. I'd say for typical gospel things, you want kind of a clean drum sound with stereo overheads. And I definitely prefer to have hat and ride mics separated as well.
Okay.
Let's see what else.
Let me ask you a tough question.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's not that tough. Where would you put the hat and ride mics? What is a hat and a ride mic? What do they look like? What kind of mic is useful for that when you're mixing? And what kind of mic just sucks? We're like, God, this is the worst hats ever.
It's interesting because I don't cut very often and I'm almost always just mixing. I very rarely know what they did. I just know it sounds bad. So I really wish I could be like, hey, what did you do? But every time you ask someone what they did, they're like, wait, what's wrong? And then you get in their head. You're
like a secret agent. You can't, you can't know where the information came from. You just know that it's got to be good.
Yes, exactly. It just has to be good.
Good intelligence.
So if it sounds good, do that. But I would say, if you called me up to cut drums tomorrow, I would probably start with some sort of like pencil condenser on both of those, and not too close, especially on that ride because it can get a little pingy.
Right.
But
on the hi-hat, would you put the condenser like sort of above it, pointing down at the hi-hat, but on the opposite side of the hat from the snare, just to get it further away from the snare itself?
Yep, that's exactly what I would do. Yeah. Yep. That typically kind of works. And usually it's just supplemental. Sometimes it's super important. But I get a lot of tracks with just a stereo overhead, and who knows if it's the drum setup or the placement of the mics or whatever, but they get to the bridge and switch to the ride and I'm like, whoa, where'd my groove go? Like I can't, like, where is it?
Meaning like you just don't even hear the ride in there?
Just don't hear it. It doesn't, it can't keep up with the choir and the guitars and the keyboards and everything else going on.
Right.
Because it was just off axis or it was too far away or whatever it was. I just need something with some presence to keep me going through that section. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I don't ever just mute those mics, but sometimes they're really important. And I'd rather have them, especially in a live recording setting, like just put the mic on there, Yeah,
spot mic the cymbals, just like you spot mic the members of the choir.
Yeah.
Better. Yeah. So it's like better to have too many mics on the drums for something like that so that you can fall back on the ones that work best.
Right, exactly. If you're going to get a great stereo overhead sound, sometimes you don't need them, but sometimes you do. So let's have them if we need them.
Now, what about room mics? Are the drums being recorded separately, and are there actually like room mics that would have just been all gospel had the singers been singing at that point? Or are room mics not needed in the same kind of way they might be for a rock record?
They're generally not needed in the same way. I sometimes love to have them and sometimes just mute them. The drums I can't imagine a time when drums are recorded at the same time as choir because that's just, there's so many people in the room that usually choir is done by itself. But yeah, in a studio recording, if I get room mics, I can use them for some ambience or some just air, which is really nice. I've had songs where I'm like, I just kill them and then need them for one section because I'm like, oh, we got kind of a different thing here. I really need some different vibe, and bring in the room mics for that.
Very cool. All right, so let's see. Here's another one. This one comes from Casey. He was asking about, I think it was one of the tracks that was just vocals from the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And he was just saying, like, how do you get a live vocal performance to sound so full without needing the instruments in there? What are your thoughts about that? I mean, is that something you even think about, or is that just, down to the production and the arrangement and stuff like that?
My initial thought is the fullness in a situation like that is coming from an arrangement. Those a cappella songs have just tremendously wonderful harmonies that work the full register. And I think that that's probably mostly where you get like the fullness. The other thing for me is just like, if there's no instruments taking up the space, you can let them have more full range. I mean, you still don't need anything on the super low end, obviously, but you can really push the bodies of the voice and the chest and the low end, and let those tenors and basses really sing. That's, wonderful to just let them be. That's great.
That was my question to you. I was going to quote a little Public Enemy and just say, bass, how low can you go? So, exactly. how much low end should you expect from vocal bass? And do you ever do like kind of real pop a cappella records too, where you're really working that proximity and effect and have a really, really deep singer?
I don't think I've had the opportunity to do like a pop a cappella thing.
You think you might push those boundaries more in that kind of world?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Where like the bass singer is the bass, like they're playing bass and kick. Absolutely. Use the proximity, throw our bass on there or whatever you got to do. Nice. Get that low end in there. And I've done some of those kind of things, or just, really push the pull tech, or, try to add some subby, kind of feeling to the vocals on some sections of some things. But yeah, it's really great to just get that on the front end with close miking and proximity effect, and just let them use the natural voice.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about bass when you have bass guitar. You mentioned our bass. Sure. What are some cool treatments for the bass? How do you make the low end really feel great in a mix?
I love our bass. That's on most of my mixes.
And maybe tell us what it does. What does it do to you? Like what is our bass doing when you use it?
Yeah, it's like a resonance generator, I guess you would call it. I don't exactly know what it does. It's not like a subharmonic generator where it adds super low ends, but it's sort of it adds the feeling of low end at higher registers. So it translates really well to smaller speakers. It translates really well on headphones. And it brings my bass just forward a little bit, and makes it feel full to me, which I really like most of the time on basses.
I think that's what confused me when I would look at stuff like that, as I would pull it up and think that it was going to add more low end to the bass, but actually I think it's sort of adding a harmonic above that.
Yeah, it's more like in like the almost 80 hertz range. I think is like it's not super low. You're not looking at that 40 hertz kind of thing, but it feels deeper, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, do you would you suggest somebody pulls up a plugin like that and just starts at the default setting, or do you have to like zero everything out and like just barely bring something in? How do we approach something like that?
Totally depends on the plugin. Sometimes the default is like, wow, that's way too much. And sometimes the default doesn't do anything, or is just perfect. I don't remember on RBass what the default is. On a lot of plugins, I set the default to my default so that when I open it up, it does what I'm used to it doing. And I don't have to make the same change every time. But yeah, I think there's like a little slider on that I generally end up pulling back, I think, from what the default is. Do you do the
thing where you're like enabling it, disabling it, and sort of checking your just regular bass versus
Yeah,
treatment added to it.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Is this helping me? Is it hurting?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Is it
So
too
maybe it's
much?
not a
Is it,
huge
yeah,
difference. Maybe it's like a subtle difference.
right,
That's
right.
something I remember learning from a guy. We had a guitar shop in Laverne, Tennessee, a guy named Mike E, who had the coolest guitar shop back in the day. He had found, I don't want to go too much of a tangent here, but when I walked in, you're like, where did all these new vintage Vox amps come from? And he had found like a warehouse
Oh, wow.
full of new old stock Vox amps. And so it was that kind of place, right? But when I got a guitar distortion pedal, he showed me, he was like, no, when you set this up, start with your clean sound and start by setting the pedal to match your regular guitar sound, and then start boosting it from there instead of just like some random, totally different thing, which it just reminds me, like, start with the bass, maybe balance where the bass is sounding great, and then add this little bit of enhancement to just see if you can just take it to the next level without it being hugely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And what does the bass need, right? Like sometimes it doesn't need that extra depth or that extra beef to it. Sometimes it needs to sit higher and let something else take up that lower space, or it just depends on the record, to be honest.
Bass, how low can you go?
Yeah.
The API Select T12 is a 2-channel, all-tube Class A microphone preamp designed with API's proprietary AP2516 transformer on the input stage and a custom API transformer on the output stage. Built with the 12 AT7WC and 12 BH7 dual triode vacuum tubes, the T12 represents a new and exciting variation on API's classic preamp technology and provides you with unique tonal options for your studio, handling a wide range of recording applications, including stereo operation. Carefully engineered to provide classic tube performance and sound, the T12 brings you API's famous warmth, punch, and clarity in a new design, including a 5-year warranty. Check out the new T12 tube mic pre and T25 tube compressor at apiaudio.com. The first rule of mixing is make good mix choices. To do that, you need to be able to hear your music clearly and accurately. Can you imagine trying to paint a masterpiece while wearing rose-colored glasses, or choosing spices for a new recipe with no sense of taste or smell? You would blindly guess with every brushstroke, or think that your cooking is amazing when actually it's terrible. That's how it feels to mix when the frequency response of your room is impacting the sound of your music. Even after you carefully position your speakers and sound treat your room, you're probably not getting an accurate sound at your mix position. The frequencies in your room can have huge peaks and valleys that are completely screwing up your perspective. This is where SonarWorks Sound ID Reference can help you with the affordable solution for calibrating EQ and balance of your speakers and headphones to give you an accurate flat frequency response. By helping you to hear your music clearly, you can now start to get your mixes right. Get a 21-day free trial at sonarworks.com. You have done a lot of work with Yash. Yash actually came out with a cool drum sample pack that I apologize to you, Yash, for I haven't had a chance to really talk about it much yet. But what a great opportunity here, because John, I think you've used it, and maybe tell us a little bit about that. I don't know if you were part of making that drum sample pack, but also talk about, like, how do you use are drum samples an important part of this? I'm guessing, they're really helpful, especially for this kind of, huge gospel choir events where there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, absolutely. I was not a part of the creation of those samples, but
I think there was maybe a video of you talking about using them on your mix and digging it.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, when he came out with it, I was like, "Yo, send it over. I gotta hear what you did."
Right.
And I love Yash's drum tones. He's a master, and he helped cultivate the modern gospel sound, really, with how he does drums and how he approaches mixes.
You
And
mean after he helped cultivate the entire Detroit funk sound with
exactly,
Parliament
exactly.
Funkadelic?
Yeah, exactly. But it came out of all that experience, and like he knows how to make that kind of record really, really well. And his drum tones are amazing. And so if he's going to put together a drum pack, yeah, get it. It's going to be good.
Nice.
So yeah, I do use samples all the time. Sometimes to enhance, sometimes to fix, sometimes I don't know. Honestly, I kind of view samples as an EQ or some other plugin. Like, it's just what does this kick drum need? Does it have plenty of low end but has no tick on it, or does it have tons of like tick but it's so hollow, or does it just like, is it paper and doesn't have anything to it? Like, what does it add and what is it lacking? And how are we going to boost up whatever it's lacking so it's not lacking it anymore? Is the best way to throw on an EQ or a compressor, or is it to add a sample underneath it? Like, it's just another tool to solve a problem, which that's all we're doing here, is trying to solve problems. So.
Yeah. So how would you go about doing that? So would you use Slate Trigger, for example?
Sure. I'll use Slate Trigger. I'll use the SPL drum exchanger. I almost always commit them to audio. Every once in a while I'm lazy, but in 99 out of 100 times, they're committed to audio, and every hit is checked, both to make sure I'm not missing a hit, and also to make sure that the phase is consistent throughout. Because if the phase isn't consistent throughout, you don't have consistent low end on a kick, and you don't have consistent backbeat on a snare. If it hits really hard on this beat and the next beat is sort of like hollow or floppy or something, like you're not going to have a good mix. So making sure that is consistent every single hit is a big key to using samples well.
So now that phase thing, I mean, that's one of the benefits of using a single trigger plugin. Like, if you load up all the slots of Slate Trigger, you can have a variety of samples in there to play back, but they're always going to play back in phase together. Now, if you had, like, would it ever make sense to have a Slate Trigger track, but then also an SPL drum replacer track going? Or is that where you run into maybe some shifting phase elements between different plugins and things?
I would say if it works and is consistent, good. But what I would do is commit both of those tracks and then check every single hit.
Right. So just tap through and look at them all.
Yep.
And then do you just like actually chop one and scoot it over a little bit if it's not right?
Yep. Absolutely. I use tab to transient. So tab. Oh, this one's off. Cut. Tab to the next one. Cut. Option tab back to the one that's off. Slide it. Crossfade and move on. Yep.
Nice.
I spent a lot of time as an intern doing that.
I just call you up when I need that to happen. I just go, "Hey, John, can you do these drums for me?"
Don't call me. That's something I outsource these days. So yeah.
Right on, man. Right on. Let's talk about some other drum tips. What are some other fun ways that we can make our drums more exciting in a mix?
Mute everything else is let them be. It's so tricky to find the right level of excitement or whatever on drums. And sometimes for me, that means pretty much no compression. And sometimes I hit the compression really hard. Sometimes I'll use an exciter, like kind of I like that, what do you call it? The Isotope Neutron 3 exciter, where you can sort of saturate a certain bandwidth with tape or tubes or whatever you want. I'll do that on drums. I'll parallel compress. I like that API 2500 if I'm really looking for some squashy drums. And sometimes no compression. Sometimes I'll just throw a little SSL bus compressor on there, a dB or two. Like, it really depends on the kit. Like, I'm kind of all over the place on that.
So would the, again, you're doing stem mixes and things like that. So ultimately, you're guiding this all towards a stereo pair for the entire drum mix, or do you actually stem out the kick and the snare separately from the stereo drums?
No, they would all be stemmed together as the drums. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then would the stereo treatment of those drums happen on that stem augs track, or would they happen before the actual augs track for your stem printing?
They would happen before. In that case, I would have like a drum sub, which is also an aux channel, and the output of that goes to the stem track, as well as the outputs of drum reverbs and anything else that I didn't want going through the sub.
And are you doing on that drum sub track, is that where you might use a compressor and then kind of blend some parallel compression together?
Yep, absolutely.
Now, what's this an easy way for us to want to do that? Is it easier to have like two subtracks, one's getting the compression and we just sort of mix it in against the other one, which is pure? Or do you find it's easy to use a plugin that has the mix knob in it for compression?
Depends on which plugin you have or which one you want. I generally will do it on a separate track. I'll just grab the last send of each drum track and option send to a new track and make that my drum parallel. That way, if I don't want the kick going to it, I can kill it. Or if I just want less of the kick going to the parallel, I can do that. And I just make those all, post fader at Unity so that they match my drum mix, basically.
Right, and then follow main pan or whatever.
Yep.
Button is. Yeah. So we didn't even ask you this, but you're mixing in Pro Tools?
I am, yeah.
All right, good. I guess we should know that, huh?
True.
Okay, cool. And then, I like splitting out the drum parallel track because it's fun to be able to just sort of solo the compressed drum and sort of see what it's really doing.
Yes. Yeah. And if you want to play around with distortion or you want to play, like, there's no limits, then you can, if you, and the version of the 2500 plugin that I have doesn't have a mix knob. So then you're kind of limited there. But also, even if you're using, I think the UAD one does, even if you're using that one and just put it on your main one, but then you're like, oh, I want to add some distortion or saturation or something. Oh, but it doesn't have a mix knob. You can't. Whereas if it's on a separate thing, you can do anything you want to it.
Yeah. And then the beauty, of course, of Pro Tools having the folder tracks now is you can kind of get complex with stuff and then just folder it all so that you don't have to think about it again. It's
absolutely.
I like the folders. There. I love them. I find them really,
really
useful now.
Yeah. I need to update my template and get rid of some subs and make them folders. I just haven't, but I'll often convert then, because you can just click on a track and say convert to folder. I do that all the time.
Okay, one last question about drum samples. So when I think of gospel, I think of more drums in the drum kit than I usually have on a rock band.
Sure.
Maybe there's a lot of cymbals, maybe there's a lot of toms and a tom fill. Are there is it rototoms I'm hearing common, or is it just that there's just like four small toms leading down to the floor tom or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say on most records I have just four toms, including the floor. Sometimes the kit's bigger and I get 5 or 6, but usually it's just I don't even know what sizes they are because they just say tom 1, tom 2. High to low, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is typical for me. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask this in a dumber way. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which of those numbers would be the one that you're like, oh yeah, if we were just doing a 4-piece rock kit, it probably would have been, 3 and 5?
Oh, if I only got to pick 2?
Yeah, if you were like, just that might give us a sense of like, okay, I'm used to these kind of sounds for a rock band, but for gospel, we need like 3 more that are higher or one in the middle.
I think it would be more like 2 and 4. Like you add one that's real tiny up at the top for sure.
Right.
And then some more like middly ones and one super low.
Middly. So, I like that. Yeah. That's a good word.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, dig it. Let's talk about one of the artists you worked with, Tweet. Never Should Have Left Ya, dance track. Talk a little bit more about balancing low end for a track like that, but also let's really get into vocals because you are a master of bringing the voice forward and just having this wonderful detail. It's almost There's a lot of stuff I heard in your discography where it's almost like the vocals dry, but you know it's not dry. It's just way present.
Sure. Present vocals are very important in gospel music, as well as I would say pop music, and B, like that. To me, that's what the song is. I want to feel the rhythm and the groove. But what do people remember is the melody, right?
I thought they remembered the rhythm guitar player, me.
Right. Yeah. Bass part, always the bass part. Yeah. Yeah. So like what's the point of this song, I think? And that's where typically the vocals are kind of the point. I don't think that's always the case. And certainly vocals in today's music are a lot louder than they used to be. And it's different in rock music. They're a lot lower in most rock music too. But in most of the music I work on, vocals are important. They are the thing. And it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to balance the energy of the track with the importance of the vocals.
Plus you've got like, you might have a lead vocal that's like,
yes.
Bigger than life in detail. And it's almost like it's whispering in your ear sometimes, it's so present, but then it's surrounded by a lush wall of backgrounds or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the hard things about mixing music with so many vocals that are all important, is that they sort of all take up the same space or take up a lot of space, and compete with each other. And so how do you have a choir that's singing full blast, top of their lungs, and also on top of that, a lead vocalist ad-libbing and singing along? And how do you balance what's important and what you're going to hear, when they also then want big drums and they want to hear all the orchestra hits and they want to hear every guitar part, and they put a bunch of power guitars on there and horns. And so how do you find that balance?
That's a good question. I have a question for you, Jon.
Sure.
How do you do that?
I wish I knew. I wish there was an easy answer, because I would crank out a lot more mixes. But in short, it's, for me and my workflow, it's a lot of balance, a lot of trying to make the right thing heard at the right time, which means a lot of time-based moves, automation, a lot of fader rides.
Right. Hence the S3.
Right, exactly. And on top of that, trying to make the frequencies work, because you can't let everything be bright, or nothing works. So trying to figure out where to put your guitars so that they don't conflict with the strings, so they don't conflict with the B3, all that kind of stuff.
Well, so let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is the balance between, okay, I've got the right static mix, but this will never sound right until I start programming automation into faders? Like, how do you think about that? Do you work towards a static mix for a while and then you start doing your automation rides?
Depends a little bit on the record. I would say on a lot of records, I don't think in terms of a static mix. I just think in terms of an unfinished mix,
Right.
like a first starting point, and I almost always end up with something way off in that first thing. But to me, I need a foundation for the vocal. So I'll build a foundation and then I'll work on the vocals. And once I feel pretty comfortable with the vocals, I'll go back and make the foundation work around the vocal.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually I end up back at the vocals to make sure that what I didn't mess up what I did on the vocal. So,
Right.
a lot of times on my, quote unquote static mix, I don't have all the tracks turned on. And then when I'm going through after I work on the vocals, I'll turn on a track. I'm like, oh, that's taken up a lot of something right there in these moments or something like that. Usually I try to get all the main tracks in, but this guitar that just comes in and out and in and out and in and out isn't going to be part of the main foundation. I'll come back to it. And then I found out, it's like a solo thing and it's really conflicting with what I did vocally. How do we make that work? Or do we need to bring the vocal up in that section or whatever it is? So
yeah. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you on Instagram about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version are they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or a computer back in the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more mixed-up mix messages from the band. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music, and it all works in your browser with no downloads required. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samply.app and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Have you ever wished you could remove the click track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of Isotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with a set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let Isotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then Isotope RX is your magic wand. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Okay, and then as far as getting the vocals right, do you find that vocal fader might be moving all over? Or do you find that's a little subtler? And if something is, like that you might reach for a clip gain and really gain up a quieter part into that compression, like what's the balance of clip gaining to get a vocal sort of at a good starting point versus just riding the mix fader?
It's almost always both. Honestly, sometimes you get a vocal that's really just not that dynamic and you don't really have to do much clip gain. Most of the time, the vocal needs both. So when I get the vocal, my assistant's already sort of cleaned it and prepped it for me a little bit. And then I'll kind of go through, sometimes I just like, okay, I'm gonna need to like clip gain some things here and like make this thing work. This section's way low compared to this section, that kind of thing.
Right.
And sometimes it's just like I start riding a fader and just have to stop constantly and be like, okay, I can't ride that up enough. We gotta fix some things here. And then I'll start clip gaining from there. Yeah. So that's
when we're talking about clip gaining, we're talking about still having compressors and stuff on that vocal track. So we're clip gaining into the compression to try to sort of like get it to sound fuller at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Fuller, audible sometimes, like all of those things for sure.
And then what is an easy way to clip gain? Would you actually put the clip gain line visible and sort of draw that in, or would you just chop a phrase or a word and just sort of gain it up?
I honestly kind of hate that clip gain line and never use it.
Yeah.
So I always chop, and then there's like a shortcut where I can just sort of flick the scroll wheel on my mouse, and it'll clip gain up.
Whoa!
And, I think it's Option Shift. It's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know exactly what it is, but I just do it all the time.
You just programmed it in.
It's default in Pro Tools. It's not my own thing. But I have that with the Kensington trackball that everyone has. And so when I hit, I think it's Option Shift on a clip and then just scroll, you can clip gain up and down.
Oh, good tip, man. Yeah. Good tip.
Yeah. You can set the, like how much it goes. I think mine's in the half dB increments or whatever. So you can get pretty precise if you want to. Or you can just flick that thing and, get it up 7 dB or whatever you need to do. That's how I clip gain. And then I just crossfade each of those clip gained things.
Okay,
I have also ridden the fader on that track and then just converted to clip gain if I just needed something to be a little smoother or something like that too.
Wait, what does that mean? Ridden the fader and then converted to clip gain? Is that a literal thing, or you mean you just switched over and did clip gain to get it right?
No, literal. Like, if like normally when I'm riding the fader, I'm on a vocal sub track. I have it going through an aux track, and so then clip gaining would be done on the actual audio track. But I can do a fader ride on the audio track, and then I don't know how you do it off the top of my head, but you think you maybe just right click and hit convert. Maybe it's in the menu. I'd have to look it up. You can Google it for sure. But
Ninja tips, dude. Ninja tips.
And just convert that volume automation to a clip gain automation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
I love that. I'll have to explore that. I'm writing this down. Rockstars, bear with me. I'm taking my own notes. And a reminder to you, Rockstars, I encourage you to not be afraid of the pause button and have a note app open. Just take notes while you're listening, because when you find this stuff, it's gold, and it's great to remember to go back and check it out later. All right, cool. So let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about some of your vocal treatments. So if you're writing, an aux track for the vocal, a couple of thoughts I have on that. One is I always hate that a little bit because you don't get to see the waveform underneath the volume line. But I guess if you're actually writing a fader, you don't care because you hear it.
Yeah, you hear it, and I'm actually like it's just the track right above the vocal track.
Yeah,
so it's right there. For me, it doesn't need to be on the same line. It works. I do that with strings or horns. I do that with a B3 that has multiple mics. It's a common workflow thing for me.
So what are some treatments? Is that also a way to have multiple parallel treatments going for a vocal, and then they're all sort of like routing through one output? Is that part of the reason you do it?
That is part of the reason. Yeah, I can do, I almost always parallel compress my vocal. So that's sent from the audio track. And then the return of that parallel channel is sent through the sub. So then I'm treating the vocal like with the main vocal and the parallel squished one together. That's a great reason to do that. It's also stereo in case I need to add a stereo plugin or something on there.
Mm-hmm.
That's convenient and doesn't mess up my mono audio track. I feel like there's some other reasons where when I don't do it, I'm like, oh, this is why I do that. But
what are some fun go-tos as far as a parallel compression on a vocal? Like if you were just going to tell somebody like, hey, go try this today and see what you think.
I'm almost always on a 1176, all buttons in.
Really? Like a Universal Audio or any other brand?
I think the Waves one is on my parallel channel, but I use the UA 1176 all the time.
Okay, cool. Like the CLA 1176 or something like that?
Yes. Yep. CLA 76 is my parallel one. But that doesn't, I use the Blue Stripe UA all the time. All the time. I love it on vocals.
Now, are you having to do extra cleanup so that the parallel compressor isn't sort of like also bringing up a bunch of junk in between vocal lines or anything like that? What tips do you have for us for that, for making sure our vocals, come in, have that incredible presence, but then go away when it's time for them to go away?
That's exactly right. I clean them. There's no audio in between phrases. And breaths are oftentimes clip gained down or faded in or something like that too, because they can get kind of unruly. That's about it really. And that's something I do. It's really important on live records for me, because there's just so much noise in there. But even on a good clean studio recording, the in between is always cut out.
That was something I remember discovering the first time I went and mixed with a real pro, was thinking that our vocals were just fine. And then, he had me do some cleanup stuff. And once I was hearing those vocals, even my cleaned up versions playing back through all the compression and everything, you realize you're like, oh my God, I didn't know all that stuff that you don't even hear is going to come straight to the front of the mix.
Yep. absolutely. And I like to parallel compress, which brings up all that stuff on a vocal. I don't use a ton of other compression, but even so, once you get that stuff on, there's almost always some extra cleanup that I end up doing while mixing.
Right, because now you hear it.
Right. Now all the S's are way too loud or whatever it is, or this breath went crazy or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a couple of good tips there. One is hearing you say you don't do a bunch of other compression. So does that mean like the main vocal track might be kind of pure with a full dynamic and it's just the parallel compressed one that really gets the compression treatment?
Yeah, the main one, I mean, I'll sometimes put kind of a utility compressor on there to get a 2 dB or so, just as a little tamer. Most of the compression comes from the parallel compression. There's often a little compression on the sub too, but not like a ton, honestly. A couple of dB. I'm not squishing things like crazy unless it's in parallel.
Yeah, well, it's cool because, there's many times where I've found myself with way too many plugins on a vocal track. And then I'm like, am I just screwing this thing up?
Yep.
And it's nice because if you leave it more pure, I mean, I guess it depends on the style of music too, but it's like the parallel tracks, you can get away with too many things,
Yes.
or getting kind of crazy with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other comment I was going to make, take away from what you said was, it sounds like you're giving us permission to get a certain part of the vocal tone exciting and great, but don't be put off by the super loud breaths or the S's yet, because we're going to have to go back and treat those after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think of it as after. I think of it as during. Like I sort of, as I'm going, this is creating a problem, but I like what it's doing to the vocal. Okay, we'll solve the problem, Okay, do I have to gain that breath down 15 dB? Okay, gain it down 15 dB just because it's getting brought back up or whatever. Those things are all easy fixes these days. So sometimes time consuming, but they're not impossible. They just take a little time.
Right. So do you encourage us to reach for, a D breath and a DS plugin, or is it like, no, dude, just start chopping and manually gain things until they're right?
I do not use a D breather. I'll use a de-esser, but it's almost always more of a broad stroke thing, and I still got to fix S's. Sometimes S's are just super like whistly or have one super bright frequency that just like I'll go in and audio suite them just with an EQ. Sometimes they just need to be brought down, and I'll clip gain them down. Maybe still use a de-esser, maybe not. But yeah, I'm not afraid of de-essers.
Do you ever find yourself wishing that Pro Tools made it easy to just kind of bring down all de-essers in a track all at once?
That would be great. Yeah.
Have you ever explored it? Like, there's times where I've thought, like, what if I just put all the S's on a parallel track and all the breaths on another one and ride the gain? But that like all these solutions become complicated in themselves,
They do, absolutely. And a lot of times the S's are different each time, right? So like this S is fine and this one's ripping my head off. So, fix the one that's ripping your head off, replace it if you want to. Yeah.
How do you judge whether it's fine or ripping your head off? Sometimes I find that to even just be difficult. Like you'll think you're treating it and then you go back and listen, or somebody else walks in there and go like, why am I talking with a lift phone,
To me, that gets back a little bit to volume of listening. If you listen loud enough, doesn't matter how good the S's are, they're going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And then you'll over DS. And if you don't listen loud at all, you'll probably miss something that's really irritating. I also have found that working on a second set of monitors, working on my little Panasonics, I'll think everything's fine. I'll switch over there. I'm like, oh wow, that's really annoying, isn't it? Like, let's go fix that. And so those are always, to me, it's mixing is so much about zooming in and zooming out. And if you zoom in on these S's, they will all bother you. So you gotta like fix the ones that bother you and zoom back out and say, okay, big picture, how are these S's? How is the song? Because that's what really matters here. I don't want the S's to detract from the song.
Yeah, that's cool. And then I think the other takeaway too is thinking about working that way. And it's like, if I'm trying to set a de-esser, God, you just go down a rabbit hole of like, what frequency should I be S-ing and how much should it pull out and all this, like looking for set it and forget it, which I do have to do mixing a podcast like this. Cause in a podcast, like you just can't go through 2 hours of conversation and bring all the S's down individually. But in a pop song, there's only so many. So, maybe don't record vocals where there's a lot of S words. If you really don't like doing it, but
choose your songs carefully.
Choose your songs carefully. But you can, don't do that next hit. She sells seashells by the seashore because you'll still be working on it. Too much work.
But I do view the de-esser as kind of a broad stroke thing, as almost a set it and forget it. Like throw on the de-esser, and that's going to help me get everything kind of under control a little bit. If they all need to come down a little bit, but then there's still going to be fixing to do, I guess. Okay, then get into the details, but at least they'll give you a better starting point.
Well, I guess my point is that the de-esser seems to have a whole bunch of things you got to set. Whereas like if you're just doing the clip gain, you're like, is this S too loud? Great. Turn it down until it's not too loud. There you go. That's where it's going to be.
Absolutely.
Cool, man. All right, let's see. What else we want to ask you about? Wonderful is your name, Melvin Crispell the third. Or Crispell the third.
I think it's pronounced Crispell.
Yeah. Great beatbox intro. I wonder if you had any recollection of doing that. Also, this is one with the big mega gospel drums, which we already talked a lot about.
Yeah. This was I don't remember how the beatboxing thing came in. It's it's a great intro, but a small part of a mix like that. But yeah, that's a classic. Big gospel sound. He's a fantastic vocalist. He, I believe, won a gospel singing competition, and as a result, ended up, on a record label and making some great records. So yeah, that was a fun album to do. Kind of did that right as the pandemic was starting, and it was like, oh wait, we can't finish this. We don't know how to get in any studios at the moment. So things kind of got delayed, and they, eventually things get figured out and sent over, and kind of get through it quickly. But it was a fantastic album. Really enjoyed working on that one with him.
Were you ever a fan of the Fat Boys?
The Fat Boys. I don't think I know them.
Dude, that's OG. That's where beatbox comes from, I think. Unless beatbox comes before that, which it probably does. Probably goes back to jug bands and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Taking it back to the 80s.
I mean, I love beatboxing in a song. I think it's fantastic. So both on its own as a part of a groove or beat or whatever. So
it's just not enough beatboxing going on in the world. Come on, rock stars. More beatbox.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. And then anything else about I call it mega gospel drums because it's just like powerful. It's like bazookas going off, the drum parts on stuff like this. And then also like, firing through the mix for these drum fills, and panning seems to be an important part of those decisions too. So do you have any thoughts about the, appropriate panning on a drum mix like that?
Yeah, it's, to me, in the drums are kind of larger than life, right? Like,
right.
They're not natural necessarily. They're
showy.
Big and powerful.
They're showy.
They're a thing in their own, and they are a point of pride almost in a gospel record, right? Like they're an important piece. And so there's big drum fills, there's big pushes, there's big hits, there's all this kind of stuff. I always do drummer's perspective. And I mean, unless again, these things always change. But if I get to pick, we're always drummer's perspective. And I like kind of wide, big toms. Think about sitting in your car air drumming. Like you want it to feel like that, right? So for me, that's what I think about when I'm panning. Is I want it to be big, larger than life. I always, one of the last steps on a mix is going through and making sure all those tom fills are there and loud enough and even enough. And, sometimes you hear the high tom ping, ping really clearly, and the low tom, you can't really get through all the mix. And so how do you get that through once everything else is done? It's an important step to making sure that the song feels right and that the drummer's intent is there.
This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Do you find that a lot of the times the solution for getting the toms right is just level adjustments in those moments? Or would you actually include a trigger tom just on? And also, that's the other part of my question is with Yash's Drum Warehouse samples, for example, coming from a gospel mixer, would a sample pack, an appropriate sample pack, have all those toms in it as well, so that you've got every element of the drum kit at your fingertips?
That would be wonderful. I honestly hate replacing toms, and only do it when absolutely necessary, because there's so much. I mean, if it's sure, easy, but a lot of times it's kind of boom, 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 boom on the low tom or something, or there's little hits and things like that. And
a lot of ghost notes. It's
really hard to get that subtlety to come through on a sample, and it's a lot of work. And I want it to feel natural in a moment like that, right? So yeah, I don't know. If I can avoid it, I don't replace the toms. If I have to, I have to, and that's part of that. But a lot of times level adjustment or EQ adjustments can kind of do the trick. There's a lot of times I just replace the tom with another hit, because this tom hit with the crash, and it's mostly crash with a little tom in it. But if I can find a clean one, I can replace that and save all our ears from that crash going through my tom EQ.
Oh, interesting. So you would find a single tom that's ringing out and just put it on top of the one that was in a fill that was followed by a crash otherwise?
Yeah, or replace it even. I'll just go earlier in the song when he happened to hit that tom without a crash cymbal, and copy it, and just tab over to the other one and hit paste.
Good tip, man. I like that one. That's a great takeaway. Yeah, because that's one of the big things is, I remember discovering, I'm I'm listening to the song, I got turned up, and then all of a sudden I'm like, why do my ears hurt so much? Oh yeah, it's because the cymbals are ripping my head off through this entire song. And then you start doing things like I'm turning down the overheads. I'm turning them down. Why is it still killing me? Until you realize you're like, oh, it's coming through the tom mic.
Yeah. Well, all my toms are cleaned. So the only time the tom tracks are open is when there's a tom hit.
Yeah.
But sometimes that just means then you get this blast of 4K coming through at you when the tom hits, because it's mostly cymbals.
Well, it's because of the end of the fill. So Rockstars, to just say the obvious, it's like a crash, but that last tom hit was trying to continue ringing out longer than the downbeat.
Yes.
And then that crash just comes screaming through because it just so happens to be right above the rejection side of the tom mic, which is the worst sounding part of that mic.
Yes. And it's so loud. Oftentimes I'm like, did you just mic the crash cymbal here, or is this actually supposed to be a tom mic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a great tip. So just take a good clean tom hit of the same actual drum and paste it over the one that has the crash in it, and then you won't have to mute it. Because otherwise I find myself, trying to put a fade on that floor tom right before the downbeat, which just doesn't let it ring out either, Now, another thing about floor toms I should ask you about is, I remember discovering, you're like, good God, what is all this sub going on in this mix? and you
Yep.
realize it's coming from that floor tom. So how important is it for us to be careful with our low cuts on toms in a mix?
I think it's very important. I that low one can be really tricky because it's supposed to be low, right? It's supposed to have boominess and low end to it. But when you put it in a mix with an 808 and a sub bass and a bass guitar, like where's it supposed to go?
Yeah, it's down.
And
You're fighting fundamentals now.
right, and he's like just riding that floor tom for 8 bars straight, and then it goes away, and like what do you? It's just like this weird rumble. You don't even hear the hits. You just hear a rumble, and it's useless, really. So,
Yeah.
for me, it's arrangement is key. And when the arrangement isn't helping you in that area, it's a matter of balance of levels and balance of EQ. And sometimes you take some more low end out of it in that section because there's just no room for it. Or sometimes you got to let it be because the producer's telling you it's supposed to be boomy there. You just got to try to make it work, honestly.
Right on. So let me jump to another record here and ask you one more question before we get to our closeout. Victory Belongs to Jesus, Todd Dulaney. It's got beautiful use of reverbs and delays for a really spacious mix. What are some tips for using effects? And then also, I think I made a note about the acoustic guitar panned right, and I don't remember what my thought was there other than just like, when do you choose to pan an acoustic like that? And what sort of EQ is really helpful in this stuff?
Sure. So starting with the panning, my guess is that the acoustic is on the right in that song because there was something on the left that I felt like it complemented, which is typically how I will structure something like that. If the hi-hat's driving the song, then the shaker's on the right, kind of thing. And a lot of times an acoustic kind of falls into that range as well. Whereas if it's a ride-driven song, move the shaker to the left and let it sort of be more hi-hatty. It's for me, I like things to be balanced and to play off of each other across the stereo field. So if I have a synth line doing something, and it's really kind of doing the same thing as the lead guitar, put one on each side. And how wide just depends on what else is going on over there. In terms of effects, that was a live recording, so it was done in a big church. I'm guessing, at least 1,000 or more seat. I don't know. I wasn't there, but big room. And so I use the room as much as I can. They'll always have audience mics. That gets a little messy once there's overdubs and fixes and things like that, because you really have to pay attention so you don't hear a lead vocal line they replaced or a piano mistake that they fixed or whatever in the room mic.
Or somebody's sitting too close to the audience mic. They're like, hey, go get me some popcorn.
Exactly. Or the obnoxious guy who thinks a whistling is a great idea halfway through a song. But there's always something wrong with the audience mics. And usually there's a lot of rides done on the audience mics too. So they come up during those lower sections where it's really important. And then they really kind of fade into the background to let the punchiness and bigness come through in those big sections. So
and whistle fix Rockstar's Isotope RX to the rescue.
All the time. Yeah,
you can literally see the melody of the whistle on the visually on the screen, right?
Yep, absolutely. And coughs and baby cry and all those things that shouldn't be in a recording but are in live recordings are oftentimes fixable with RX. So I love RX, and yes, I use it frequently.
Yeah, and occasionally coughs on podcasts. And so once again, Jon, thank you for braving some of this winter cold season to join us on the show, man. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So there was so with the effects too. I mean, you use in the room. Yeah. But and there's another song, so I'll throw this in as well, Call to Action, Anthony Brown and Group Therapy. It's got some of that, what I would call that kind of almost taking me back to the 80s, like that classic wash verb that you hear on S's and sibilants.
Sure.
Is that a thing? Am I just hearing it, or is that actually a thing that you intentionally would choose to do where like it's almost like it takes the sibilants and just kind of when it happens?
Sure. I sometimes really like that kind of sheen on the reverb and sometimes find it super annoying. And I will change the reverb or the EQ into the reverb or whatever on those to either get it or not get it.
So it is a
Yeah.
complicated thing you have to set up, or is it more like the
Mhm.
choice of the effect just sort of seems to bring
It's
something like that out?
it's mostly the choice of the effect, but sometimes it's I need to ride the send down on the S's or something, or just throw darken the input of the reverb or whatever to make that less obnoxious.
But I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes you want it, right? I feel
absolutely.
like it's a
Yeah.
sought after effect sometimes.
Yeah. And when that's the case, I'd let it roll and just pick a reverb that kind of does that really.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's not really a question of like boosting the S at a certain time or anything like that.
No, I don't think I've ever boosted the S's into a reverb. It's
Okay,
just
cool.
letting it happen naturally. Yeah. Yeah.
Dig
And
it.
with effects for me, it's always a balance of reverbs and delays. And I like a stereo slap on things almost all the time. So that's sort of how I create the depth of the vocal. Is I want it to be forward and present. And also I don't want it to be dry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and would you use a sort of a template of ready to go effects that you might try out on a mix? And would these effects actually go out of the stereo vocal stem, or
Yeah.
would they just go straight to the two bus?
So the effects are sent from the vocal sub, which is like where most of my processing happens in the vocal, um, and then the outputs of the effects are sent to the vocal wet stem. So I'll have a vocal wet stem and a vocal dry stem,
Ooh,
and the wet ones just go to the wet stem.
very fancy, dude. You're fancy, man.
I'm trying to save time.
Yeah, it's great. Well,
Yes,
good
make
luck with
life
that, man.
easier.
You're on Recording
Right.
Studio Rockstars. You can't save any time here.
uh,
Awesome, man. Well, with respect to your time, and we're coming near the end here, maybe I'll jump to our final closing question and just kind of hit you up with this one. We'll take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to find young Jon. Um, you know, just I don't know. I don't know what stage you're in. Maybe you're assisting with Yash, or maybe it's long before that. And you say, "Listen, dude, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing that you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day." What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
Man, all of the advice. I think maybe the most important thing I would tell myself is just ask all the questions. Ask the dumb questions. Like, you don't know what you don't know until you start asking questions. So if someone is showing you the studio and tells you to do something a certain way and you don't know why they're telling you to do it that way, you should ask. Like, you should know why, because they have a reason they're doing it that way. If you don't know how everything's connected or is working together, like, ask. Even if you think you're supposed to know or you're expected to know, like, either A, you're not expected to know because you're new or young, so ask anyway, or B, if you don't ask and you are expected to know, you still don't know. So just ask. Yeah, one anecdote with as an intern, they told me they were printing at the time through a console and recording onto a separate Pro Tools rig.
Mm-hmm.
And um, Grant, the assistant, of course, does all that. And he told me, when you're printing, you put the input on this on their monitor controller. And I was like, okay, cool. And I was doing a print and didn't have that button pushed. And I could hear the mix. I was listening to the mix. I was doing the quality check in my mind. And I didn't understand that if I don't select that input, I'm hearing the mix, but I'm not hearing the output of the other Pro Tools rig. I'm not
Right.
hearing what's actually being printed. And that's what we're trying to
Right.
check here. That's the whole point of listening.
Yeah.
So, I was scolded and educated at that point, and didn't do that again. But to me, it's, if you don't know why something is done a certain way, you're never going to learn. So ask the questions, ask them all.
go clean the espresso machine. Right. Come back and think about what you've done, Jon.
Right. And then you should ask, how do I clean that espresso machine? Yes.
That's why we have how to clean the espresso machine YouTube videos privately for the Toy Box Studio.
Exactly. Go in the bathroom and Google that thing. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Yep. Well, dude, thanks so much for joining us on the show. Thanks for stepping up despite feeling a little bit under the weather today. Much appreciated. We just really appreciate you sharing all this insight into mixing and what you do and taking time out for us. So please let the rock stars know, where would you like them to go check out your work? Where should they go learn more about you? Of course, we got a playlist in the show notes as well. And what if they're just ready to make their next hit record and they want to contact you?
Yeah, I can be found at jonblass.com. JONBLASS, and on my Instagram at Jon Blass as well. There's an email button right on Instagram, or you can email through the website. I'm easy to get a hold of. But yeah, I'd love to hear from everybody.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you, man. And I look forward to seeing you in person.
Likewise.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, man. You getting ready to make something today?
I am, yeah. I got a few tweaks to do, and I'm supposed to finish up a mix I was working on yesterday. So
awesome, man. Yeah. Well, remember to solo the keyboard when you're working on the guitar part.
Always.
All right, dude. I'll talk to you soon, dude. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening, rock stars. Ciao. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who helped make this episode possible. API, OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, SonarWorks, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of their plugins. And sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at sampley.app, or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. And don't forget to use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in the description of the podcast. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to give a big thank you to our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks, guys. And thanks so much for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.